Hi, guys. Sorry I'm not here to be able to discuss this with you in person, but I'd like to take a minute for all of us to have a look at one particular chapter from Their Eyes Were Watching God, and then we're going to take a look at these slides I have here about the history of the US Census. You read a series of chapters over the weekend. In particular, I want us to take a look at chapter 16, where Hurston introduces a character to us named Mrs. Turner. She and Janie have a conversation here for a couple of pages, and she's a minor character in the book, but she's a very important character in terms of the history of African Americans in this country, as well as some of the topics that Hurston and in turn this unit are interested in, and that is language's relationship to social status as well as race. So the chapter begins on page 139, and if you guys would flip over to the bottom of 139, take a look at how Mrs. Turner is described. She's a milky sort of woman that belonged to child bed, her shoulders rounded a little. She must have been conscious of her pelvis because she kept it stuck out in front of her so she could always see it. Tea-Cake made a lot of fun of Mrs. Turner's shape behind her back. He claimed that she had been shaped up by a cow kicking her from behind, etc., etc. Not a very flattering image. The next paragraph on 140, but Mrs. Turner's shape and features were entirely approved by Mrs. Turner. Her nose was slightly pointed and she was proud. Her thin lips were an ever delight to her eyes. Even her buttocks and bas relief were a source of pride. To her way of thinking, all these things set her aside from Negroes. That was why she sought out Janie to friend with. Janie's coffee and cream complexion and her luxurious hair made Mrs. Turner forgive her for wearing overalls like the other women who worked in the fields. Remember, Janie's mother and grandmother, early on in the book, we learned that they were both raped by white men. Hence, Janie's complexion, which gets explained here on page 140. So we can imagine Hurston is setting up a description of Mrs. Turner as well as a description of Janie, and Mrs. Turner seeks out Janie because she looks like her, right? Or she something with her skin color, she looks like her. But continuing on this, she didn't forgive her, Janie, for marrying a man as dark as Tea-Cake, but she felt that she could remedy that. That was what her brother was born for. She seldom stayed long when she found Tea-Cake at home, but when she happened to drop in and catch Janie alone, she'd spend hours chatting away. Her disfavorite subject was Negroes. So Mrs. Turner is willing to forgive Janie for wearing overalls like a commoner, because she has, like Mrs. Turner, light skin. What she's not willing to forgive Janie of is marrying Tea-Cake, who presumably, as is described in this paragraph, a man as dark as Tea-Cake. So from 140 on until 145 or so, they have this conversation about race in this country. I want to point to a quote in particular in a passage on 141. And this is the 4th paragraph. Use different from me is how it begins. And the most important thing that I want you guys to take away from this is that Mrs. Turner suggests to Janie in that paragraph, us oughta class off. What she means by that, to class off, is the suggestion that us light-skinned women, ought not to marry dark-skinned men. But here she is equating the color of one's skin with one's social status. And they go on to talk, or Mrs. Turner goes on to talk, to complain about the way that black men act, speak, etc., that there's always cutting the monkey for white folks. And here Mrs. Turner is pointing out those stereotypes that we looked at on the very first day of this. The idea that black men sing and dance and perform for the benefit of white men. This is a stereotype that goes all the way back to slavery in this country. She's criticizing them for it, and she's saying that the men that Janie and Tea-Cake hang around with, the ones that we saw in the previous chapter, sitting around, playing games, talking, telling stories, that's what Mrs. Turner is critical of. Now, she has some money herself, and she, as she says at the bottom of 141, it's not the poorness, it's the color and the features. Who want any little old black baby lying up in the baby buggy looking like a fly in the buttermilk? Who wants to be mixed up with a rusty black man and a black woman going down the street in all them loud colors and hooping and hollering and laughing over nothing? What's important about that description at the bottom of 141 is if we connect it with what Mrs. Turner said earlier, that us oughta class off. The two things in that paragraph at the bottom of 141 that she is equating with class are color of skin and the way that someone speaks. We've looked a lot in this unit at the way that someone speaks and how we are able to socially identify people or determine social markers based on the way someone speaks. And in fact, that documentary that we watched, American Tongues, is almost exclusively about all of that, linguistic prejudice, as linguists call it. Well, that's what Mrs. Turner's engaging in here when she's talking about hooping and hollering and laughing over nothing. She's prejudiced against the way that African Americans tend to talk, and she's equating that prejudice with the darkness of their skin color. And that's what this slideshow here that I want us to walk through together is about, is the way that skin color has played a factor in identification in this country, and in particular with African Americans. So we're going to take a step back in time through the US Census Bureau's questionnaire that has been going on for a long time in this country. First thing, what I need you guys to do is take a minute and on an index card or on a scrap piece of paper in your notebook, identify what race you are. This is not a rhetorical question. I want you to please take a minute, write down how you would identify what race you are. Okay, we got it? All right, hang on to that, because what I'm going to ask you guys as we go through this data is to see, are you counted in the US Census? For instance, this is the very first census in this country in 1790. The Constitution had literally just been ratified. The ink is barely drying, and the United States needs to determine who these people are. 5 questions to identify the race. Now, there were many questions on a census. I'm focusing here in this presentation just on the questions about racial status. You could identify yourself as a white male under the age of 16, white male over the age of 16, free white female, other free persons, and slaves. If you are a non-white female, it appears that the country was not interested in you in 1790. Fast forward a few years, here's 1820, and we had 4 categories: free white males and females. Well, now we've at least captured the free white males, the free white females. We're no longer concerned with age. Slave males and females, okay. Free colored persons, male and female. And then notice number 4. And that's a really significant thing, because number 3 is the only question that specifically asks about, number 1 and number 3 are the only questions that specifically ask about the color of your skin. It is presumed in number 2 that you are black. But you might be a black person who is free as in not in bondage in 1820, and that's where you would count number 3, or you might be a foreigner. And this is really significant because in 1820 in this country, there were German immigrants, there were some Irish immigrants, Scottish, Swedish, and the powers that be in the United States did not see Germans, Swedes, as necessarily white. White meant that you spoke English as a native language and that you presumably in 1820 had lived here for some time. That's where that comes into play. Jump ahead 10 years, right? The census, guys, is done every 10 years. So now we've added a question in 1830. Persons who are blind, deaf, or dumb, curious addition, but I guess they needed to categorize that in 1830. In 1850, we have 2 questions. You are a free person of color, white, black, or mulatto. So they're recognizing that you are, slavery here in 1850 is playing a crucial role in the census. Or you're a slave, and your slave color is black or mulatto. You guys know what mulatto means in this context? I'm assuming somebody got this. It means that one is mixed. It's an antiquated term for someone who is both black and white, as in perhaps a parent, grandparent of one or the others. And then we've continued to identify the mental state of, in this case, only slaves. 1870, 20 years after 1850, the Civil War has passed, which means that those black Americans previously identified in bondage are now all free. So you may now identify whether you are white, black, mulatto, or now we've added Chinese. In 1880, we add American Indian. Nope, they didn't just show up in 1880. Obviously, they've been here for a long time. But if you guys know your history, what's happening now in the 1870s and 80s, large westward American expansion and the construction of Indian reservations. So I guess by 1880, we felt it critical to identify exactly how many of these people were still left in this country. 1890, we've added Japanese. And we've added these two words here, number 7, number 8, quadroon and octoroon. Anyone know what those mean? So the roots of these words is where you can get at what they might mean. Quad means 4, octo 8. The idea of a quadroon means that, let's take for instance the idea that your parents are white. However, one of your grandparents is not white, which would make you a quadroon. So, as compared to a mulatto, an octoroon is 1/8. So this is going to your great-great-grandparents. You would have one of them who was not white. In 1890, this, even as an octoroon, that made you a segregated legal minority in this country. 1900, this changed. Identify whether the person is white, black, Chinese, American, Indian, Japanese. We have the distinction between the percentage of how black one person is gone from the census, but it is still very much ever present in the minds of Americans. 1910, we add mulatto back again, and we've dropped those quadroon and octoroon phrasings. Mulatto came to become the catch-all term for someone who was mixed race. Now, we might think today that someone who is mixed race means that a parent is of one race and the other parent is of the other race. In 1910, mixed race could mean that your parents, your grandparents were all of one race, but one single great-great-grandparent was of another race, and that would count as a mulatto. This matters. And notice also in 1910 we've added other, so there's a little bit of an opportunity to choose something not in this box. I don't know, look at what you guys wrote for yourselves and sort of seeing if you fit into these boxes. I'm guessing by now, 1910, all of us fit somewhere on this list. That option still exists in 1930, though the terminology, notice how the language has changed. We are no longer identifying African Americans as black, but now as Negro. We've eliminated mulatto as an option, and we've added some more countries to our list. Mexican Hindu, which you may know is not a country, but a religion. Filipino, Korean. 1940, the question changes slightly. I'll flip backwards so that you can see. 1930, the question was, identify whether this person is, and this person is the person who's responding to the survey. 1940, identify what race or color the person is. Again, please take note of the language. The Census Bureau has two questions that they want to know. What is your race or what is your color? You can be white, Negro, Chinese, Japanese, American Indian, no more Mexicans, Hindu, Filipino, Korean, or other. 1950, we got rid of the Hindus and the Koreans. 1960, we've introduced a lot of new peoples, Hawaiian, part Hawaiian, Aleut, Eskimo. Added a new state here. 1970, we brought the Koreans back. Again, the question is, what race or color? 1980, Vietnamese. Of course, this comes from the resettlement of over 250,000 Vietnamese. I believe there's more than that from post the Vietnam War. 2000, the question changes to an identifier question. And an important note was added to the 2000 census, and that is that you had the option to select more than one. Again, going back, even if we go back to where other was an option, you were asked to identify in 1980 with one of these 11 things, or other. But you had to choose one of those. And now in 2000, you had the option of choosing more than one. The terminology has changed significantly. White, black, or African American. We're allowing for both of these terms. American Indian, or Alaska Native. Asian, Native Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islander. Hispanic or Latino. Some other race. Two or more races. Take a minute here to pause, if you want to, and talk amongst yourselves about whether you fit in one of these two categories, or one of any of these categories. So this is the census from 2000, and there's some more details that I'd like to share with you about the 2000 census, because the census added some descriptors here. So I'll take a minute to, if you wrote on your index card that you're white, in 2000 this would mean that you have an origin in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. It includes people who indicate their race as white, or report entries such as Irish, German, Scottish, Italian, Near Easterner, Arab, or Polish. So you could also identify black or African American. This definition is a little bit more succinct, but a person having origins in any of the black racial groups of Africa. It includes people who indicate their race as black African American or provide written entries such as Kenyan, Nigerian, or Haitian. So you can imagine someone who just arrived in the country in 1999, newly from Kenya, and then identifies him or herself as black or African American. The choice in number 1 and number 2 have to do with the color of your skin. The choice in number 3 has to do with your ethnic group, which doesn't necessarily hold to the color of one's skin. And notice here this includes people, American Indians from Central America, who maintain tribal affiliation or community attachment. Some more details. Asian, if you selected this. Person having origins in the original peoples of the Far East, Southeast Asia, or the Indian subcontinent, including Cambodia, China, India, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Pakistan, Philippine Islands, Thailand, Vietnam. Those of you who are from any of these places, or if your family is from any of these places, you know that Cambodians and Pakistanis are of quite different ethnic and cultural backgrounds, including skin color, which this census questionnaire asks one to identify. But here, the United States government has lumped all of the peoples of the Far East into one nice, neat category. Number 5, Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander. And you can take a look at all of the variations here. And number 6, Hispanic or Latino, a person of Cuban, Mexican, Puerto Rican, South or Central American, or other Spanish culture or origin, regardless of race. Significant here because, as many of you probably know, or if you visited Central or South America, you know that the color of one's skin varies greatly across those two continents. Yet the majority of the people there are Spanish speakers and might count themselves as Hispanic or Latino. And so it's important that what the government's doing here is they're allowing for a regardless of race option in here to lump people together. And then you get number 7, number 8, some other race, 2 or more races. 2010 is the most recent survey. So these censuses are done every 10 years. And the racial questions were only 2 on the census. Are you of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin? So that was a yes or no question that the census is asking you. And the next question is, what is your race? The response to these questions are now open-ended. You can ponder why the government might want to draw a distinction here for one particular group of people. No longer is the government identifying African Americans or asking specifically, are you or are you not an African American? Are you or are you not a Pacific Islander? They're turning the onus over to the citizens and to you guys to self-identify, which is what I asked you to do on the card. So by the time that you actually take a census as an adult in 2020, I don't know what the questions will be, but do pay attention to this. Connecting this all the way back to our book, which takes place in around 1930, or if we want to, around 1930. The options for people like Janie, the character, Mrs. Turner, the character, would be white or Negro. Perhaps they would identify as mulatto, though that wasn't an option for the census. The option for Zora Neale Hurston as a real person would be to choose one of these categories. And the way that the census has named these things over time is often a reflection of how race and social status matter in the United States over time. Again, I leave you with, if this is something that you are interested in, there is more that you could seek out for an FOA or a written task. Thank you.